In this video, we're going to talk about some things you need to know about sex before you get married. Now, sex is a very important part of a healthy marriage, so it's really, really key for you guys to be on the same page about your past, about the expectations you have about sex and marriage, and ultimately God's design and purpose for sex. Here's what you need to start with: the right information. Now, this gets a little bit personal. That's why we put this video at the end. Hopefully you've built some trust with your marriage mentors or the couple you've gone through this with, your pastor, that when it comes to this topic, you are comfortable enough to talk about it because it's a really important conversation to have. So to get with the right information, to start with your own personal story is really important. And here's why. Your past experience, if you have any, from other relationships, you need to talk about with your fiance. And hopefully you've already done that in your dating time, but it's a hard conversation to have sometimes. So if you haven't done that, then you need to do that right away. And here's why that's important. There's health ramifications, obviously, if you have had other partners in your past and now you're coming into this relationship and this marriage, it's important, it's only fair for your fiance to know where you've been and what might there be any physical ramifications that they need to be aware of. And the other piece of it is it's also just about building trust, that your past may have been your past and you can't change that, but who you are today and who you're going to be as a couple moving forward, to understand that it's about earning trust. It's about sharing those parts of your story, all of you, right? All of you is coming into marriage. You need to share all of your story with one another. And here's something that I really want to drive home, that if you haven't had that conversation yet, or maybe you've started that conversation and then you've gotten stuck, or one person's feelings get hurt, or it's just been really hard, this is the time to do it, and do it with your mentoring couple or your pastor, whoever's doing your pre-marriage counseling, because it's so important for you to have the right information about your own personal stories. Here's the second thing you need to know about sex before you get married. Have the right expectations. You know, again, depending on your story and your situation, past experiences that you've had sexually or leading up to sex, you form expectations from that. Maybe you sit here today and you are virgins, which is a beautiful, wonderful thing, and you're both coming into the situation saying, I have no idea what my expectations are, but I know that sex is supposed to be fun and good, and you're right. But it is important for you to have the right expectations about sex, and here's what I mean by that. If you only go by what our movies and our TV shows and our terrible books that get very explicit about sex, you would think that it's all about just the emotion and it's lust. It's just, I can't get enough of you and I can't stop myself and I have to have it. But the reality is that's not what sex is about in marriage. It's a very vulnerable place to be, right? It's kind of like going back to the garden with Adam and Eve before they knew that they were naked. I mean, who else are you naked with in your life except for your husband or your wife, right? I mean, you get to that place where, I don't walk around my house, or I don't want anyone else to see me naked but my husband. I mean, it's a very vulnerable thing that's supposed to be very intimate, and it's supposed to be shared only between that husband and wife. And it's supposed to be a very selfless act. It's about meeting the needs of one another. It's not about this, I want you and I want you now because I want to fulfill only my own needs. Though, unfortunately, for a lot of people, that's what sex becomes. But a healthy view of sex, the right expectation of sex, is that it's very much a coming together, working together, finding out how to meet the other person's needs, so sex is an enjoyable experience. And so here's the caveat to that. It's important for you to know as an expectation about sex, especially if you haven't had the experience in your life before, which again, like I say, is a beautiful, wonderful thing if that's the case. But sex is not always easy. So it's important for your expectations to be prepared for the fact that just like any other area of your relationship, communication, you have to work at sex. You have to work together. That's part of, I think, how God designed it to be, that it isn't selfish, it's selfless. So it's putting the other person and their needs ahead of your own. And for women, oftentimes, it can be a challenge for sex to be fully enjoyable. It's just the way we are. There's more of a mental capacity that we have. So husbands, you need to come to your wife and make sure she feels love, that she feels connection. Then sex will be more of something that she can connect to and enjoy. For men, typically and usually, it's not as hard for you to enjoy the sex experience. For you, you get full satisfaction every time. That's wonderful. Good for you. But for women, sometimes that's hard for women to be fully satisfied in that experience. And so it's about working together. And it's important that you have that expectation. Talk about that. Be aware of that. It doesn't need to be the skeleton or the something in the closet. It's just a very normal thing that sex should be about working together and figuring out what each of you need in that experience to be fulfilled and to enjoy it. And that's part of the beauty of how God created sex, right? That it's selfless and it's sacrificial. It isn't lustful and it isn't selfish. Here's what Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 7. He says, the husband should fulfill his wife's sexual needs and the wife should fulfill her husband's needs. The wife gives authority over her body to her husband, and the husband gives his authority over his body to his wife. So again, you just see that picture that in God's design for what sex is supposed to be about is that actual oneness time where a husband and a wife come together and they yield themselves to one another and they give themselves in a way that you don't give to anybody else in the whole world. And you satisfy them and you meet their needs. That's the right expectation for sex and marriage. And here's the last thing that you need to know about sex before you get married. Have the right solutions. So if you get married and sex is a struggle, which for a lot of couples it is, especially in the beginning, because again, it's just learning your own body, it's learning each other, and it's figuring it out together. But that's the beauty, that you figure it out together. But to have the right solutions means you talk about it, you're honest in your communication. Here's some of the normal pitfalls that happen with a lot of couples. Wives sometimes feel like husband comes toward wife and gives attention and is romantic because they want to get lucky in the bedroom. And wives don't like that. And that becomes something then that you almost bristle against any kind of affection if you're not in the mood to go have sex, or you feel like all I'm good for is for you to be satisfied. And on the other side, for husbands, oftentimes women withhold sex as a form of punishment when they're mad. And men don't want to feel like that. They don't want to feel like you can have sex when you've been good, but you can't have sex when you've been bad. So the right solution is that you're always communicating together. How are we doing in this area? Where can we improve? How can I be romantic? How can I meet those needs more for you? What's our expectation of how many times in a week do we think we should be having sex? Those are all really important conversations that you need to have. So you're on the right page, you're on the same page, and you're coming up with solutions to possible problems as it regards sex in your marriage. And I think if you can communicate through that, that's going to go a long way. And sometimes, and maybe, it's going to require talking to someone outside of your marriage. And don't be afraid to do that. Don't be afraid to seek godly counsel from people and to say, we're really struggling in this area, or we can't get on the same page about this. Can you help us? Because the truth be told, more often than not, couples are struggling in some way with sex. And if you can talk about it as a couple, be honest about it, and work at it, and if you can bring in outside perspective and advice, that will go so far to help that sex continues and should be a strength and something that you both look forward to in your marriage. That's, again, that picture of coming together and being one and totally vulnerable with one another. That's supposed to be a beautiful expression of your love and not something that causes dissension and strife. So those are a few things that you need to know about sex before you get married. And I hope that it's helpful and it creates some great conversation between you and your fiance.